Since the Packers moved on from Jaire Alexander, there's been some he said, she said in all of this, some in dramatic fashion. The reality is the Green Bay Packers were never that serious about keeping Jaire Alexander, and Jaire Alexander played the best hand he had.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook, subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts. You will find Locked On Packers, the number one Packers podcast on the internet. And the show for fans who know what happened, they want to know why and how, thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Since the Packers moved on from Jaire Alexander, there has been some reporting about what happened. And then there's been some, I would guess, criticism. Let me call it that way. Let me phrase it that way. Reporting of that from Jaire Alexander's father on social media. And his dad has never been one to shy away from joining the fray. Not quite, like Christian Watson family member levels of joining the fray, but certainly out there. And that criticism of the reporting that Jaire Alexander was not willing to take a pay cut has made some headlines, has made some waves, let's say. And there were some accusations that the Packers misdiagnosed Jaire Alexander's injury. Can't speak to that. Not there, not a doctor. But there was also an assertion that Jaire Alexander was not going to play for free and that the Packers basically didn't want to guarantee any of Jaire Alexander's money. I understand the perspective of the father of an NFL player looking at that and going, this was not a serious offer. I understand that perspective. It was Father's Day yesterday. I'm a dad. I have two kids. I understand. Okay. But here's the reality. The contract that the Packers signed Jaire Alexander to, and that Ja, by definition, had to sign, included no guaranteed money this season. The difference in what would have been the contract had Jaire Alexander stayed in Green Bay and what he was apparently offered. The reporting was highly incentivized and would have made him a free agent after 2025, actually fits perfectly with this accusation from Alexander's dad. My guess is this was for a very low base salary with big time play bonuses. You get paid if you play, and if you don't, you don't. And what really amuses me about this is, okay, if you're Jaire Alexander, you don't want that. You want a salary. Like, okay, I'm willing to take a pay cut, but I'm not willing to have guaranteed is the wrong phrasing because it's not truly guaranteed. But for example, Jaire Alexander in 2024 got a base salary, but played 8 games. The whole point of the Packers, the inciting factor in them wanting to move on is that Jaire Alexander does not stay healthy. So for them to say, here, we're willing to offer you this contract based on you actually playing is eminently reasonable from their perspective. And I think it is eminently reasonable from Jaire Alexander's perspective to go, no, I'll take less, but I want to make sure that I'm protected here. Now, if you're the Packers, you can just say no. The whole point is that they want to be insulated against Jaire Alexander not playing. And I don't think it's totally fair to say, well, the Packers never gave a serious offer. I don't know that that's true. If they proposed a contract that would have gotten him to $10, $15 million with incentives, that seems like a pretty reasonable contract. We don't know if that was in fact what they offered. Maybe we'll get understanding of that at some point. We did with Aaron Jones. The difference is, you'll notice that with Aaron Jones, he signed like the next day in Minnesota. It's been a week. Jaire Alexander is still a free agent. And not even like, hey, conversations with, met with, no, just like, he's just out there. And maybe he just wants to take some time, wait for training camp. That could be. We see veteran players wait until camp regularly and still get signed to decent deals. Jadeveon Clowney waited last year until into training camp, I believe, and got a multi-year contract from the Carolina Panthers. Maybe that happens. But this whole they weren't willing to guarantee any of his money. Yeah, duh. That was the point. The reason they wanted to move on was because they didn't want to pay Jaire Alexander $15, $18 million a year to play 7 or 8 games. And so it makes sense that the contract they would propose would be commensurate to that desire. But the idea, they didn't guarantee any of the money. There wasn't guaranteed money anyway. Now, you could call it a practical guarantee. Like if you have a $10 million base salary, whether you play 4 games or 8 games or 16 games, you're going to get that money. But you can see how, from the Packers' perspective, Jaire Alexander going, well, I want money no matter if I play or not. You can see how, from Green Bay's perspective, they would go, no. Like the whole point, literally the whole point, is that we would rather not pay you to not play. So if you're going to play, we're happy to pay you. Now, if the reporting comes out that they had offered, the veteran minimum and $500,000 play bonuses, that might be close to where you'd go, but $500K times 17 games, you're talking about still a salary close, $9-10 million all in. Is Jaire Alexander going to get a contract for $10 million APY on the free agent market? I guess we'll see. It seems like if that had been his market in the trade market, if teams thought that they could get a contract done for that amount, they probably would have done it with the trade. Like, that's not an expensive price to pay for Jaire Alexander, someone who is that good, an all-pro caliber corner. So I understand why the father of Jaire Alexander would be miffed about a contract offer that way, but I also totally understand why the Packers would have offered a deal like that, and it seems like that's what they did. We'll see who ends up being right. My guess is he will sign a deal. This is my prediction. He will sign a deal that will be for less money than he could have made on the Packers contract. But what he wanted was an assurance that he was going to get more of that money, which is, in a way, a tacit admission of his own injury risk. And I also would not begrudge him that, because he's, I would think, a smart enough human to understand there is a risk here. And I'd rather go to a team that's going to pay me and pay me to believe in me. The Packers clearly do not. I don't think the Packers were ever that serious. I think they went into this offseason going, we're going to move on from Jaire Alexander. And once it became difficult to get something for him, they went to him. They said, here, how about this? This is the most money we are willing to give you, and it's only money we are willing to give you if you play, knowing he probably was not going to take it. Remember, there was reporting from multiple outlets. Tom Silverstein and Rob Domowski reported there would not be a pay cut. Jaire Alexander would not be willing to take a pay cut. That was the only leverage he had in trades and with the Packers. I'm not going to take a pay cut. So cut me and let me go where I want. We talked about this so many times. He played that card, and then now, at least through his dad, is complaining about having played that card. Okay? We'll see what the real value is. We'll see what the real value is. Speaking of injuries, some rookies and second-year players already behind the 8 ball with injuries. We'll talk about it next on Locked On Packers. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, the intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds, usually over foul calls. It's the kind of atmosphere you must experience live. This year's matchups are already delivering. The finals has delivered. This has already been a much better finals than anyone thought it could be. And if you want in, Gametime makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to tip-off. And with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Gametime is a game changer. I love to see the exact view from my seat before I buy. No surprises. I want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Plus, you'll find great seats for as low as $100 thanks to exclusive discounts on NFL tickets. You want to go see the Packers play? Maybe you want to see the Packers play? Okay, go to Gametime. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app. Last minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed. Remember last year's rookie class? Hurt. Jordan Morgan hurt to open camp. Hurt in the regular season. Ends up missing half the year. Marshawn Lloyd barely plays because he's hurt. Edgerrin Cooper got hurt a couple different times. Injuries are the fastest way to scuttle your development as a rookie. And understand, I am not criticizing any of these players. It is not within their control that they got hurt, presumably. None of the injuries, Colin Oliver, the exciting pass rusher, day 3 pass rusher, John Williams, again, another intriguing player, offensive lineman. We're going to talk about the pads part of this in a second, but like, you need these reps. Darius Robinson. Let's add Kalen King into this because he's banged up now. Like, he has an opportunity to really play and couldn't get out there. Couldn't get out there because he's hurt. Again, not his fault, just the reality of the situation. It is so harmful to the development. By the way, I said Darius Robinson. He's a defensive lineman. Micah Robinson is the Packers corner, 7th round pick. And he was hurt. And by the way, Micah Robinson's injury is one of the reasons Bo Melton was playing corner in minicamp. My guess is by the time training camp rolls around, they will have either added someone or Kalen King will be healthy and they won't have to do that. That would be my guess. Just my guess. But Robinson and King in particular, the fact that they moved Bo, or at least gave Bo Melton some reps, is proof there is an opportunity here for someone to make this team, to potentially have a cornerback 4 on the boundary. I think it's going to be harder for someone like Kalen King because seemed like he was primarily a slot defender, and they have so many guys that can do that can play there with Bullard, with Hobbs, and with Keyshawn Nixon. But there's corner spots to be won. If you're hurt, you can't win those spots. It's such a developmental issue. Colin Oliver, I think that there are more players in front of him in terms of guys who are going to get opportunities. In addition to, the starters, Van Ness, Gary, you've already got Kingsley Enagbare, Brenton Cox. You're clearly behind those guys. Add Baron Sorrell. Okay, so that's defensive end 5. But could Colin Oliver have outplayed Baron Sorrell? Could he have pushed Brenton Cox? Maybe. It's hard to do when you're not out there. Can you steal a spot from Aaron Mosby? Maybe. Can't do it if you're not out there. Now these are day 3 players. Oliver, Robinson, Kalen King before him. They're John Williams. Those are day 3 players. But all the more reason, you need every opportunity. You need every rep here. And to miss them, it's just by the time training camp opens, you're going to be behind. And maybe everyone shows up and everyone's healthy and it's all good. The chances of that, by the way, are just low. There's a reason it's a 90-man roster to start and you cut it down because you're going to have injuries. It just becomes so difficult. Not the least of which because you're already taking a rookie class from last year. A bunch of guys who had been hurt. Now they're coming back to get their opportunities. You're fighting against all these guys who have already been in the system or already been NFL players, even if they weren't in Green Bay. Like John Williams was one of those guys who was very intriguing that there was a consensus that he belonged higher up these draft boards than he ultimately got drafted. The Packers have to put together a coherent offensive line plan. Can he play tackle? Can he play guard? Maybe he's a future center. Okay, but you got to figure that out. He's got to be out there for you to have those opportunities at evaluation, at growth, at evolution. If you're not out there, it can't happen. And there's a huge difference between, say, Savion Williams in a red no contact jersey, but like he can be running routes. He's getting reps with Jordan Love, the feel, the timing, all that stuff that you need. Yeah, he's not allowed to get hit, but also it's a practice in shells. There's no pads on, there's no takedowns, there's no tackling. So that kind of stuff is way less important than him just being out there. You can't even be out there. Like mental reps are useful. It's not that they're like being at camp and being with the rehab group and still taking your mental reps and doing film and doing installs and those kinds of things, still being there for that stuff. It's better than sitting on your couch. But the gap between sitting on your couch and being there for the mental walkthrough is probably the same distance as being there for walkthroughs and actually getting to go through the process. And I know, not a lot of full speed stuff, but like they're still doing 11 on 11. They're still doing 7 on 7. That stuff matters, especially for corners, for example, where your young players, Kalen King did not play last year. Like basically a red shirt season. There's a lot a corner can get from a 7 on 7 in the spring. There's a lot a corner can show in 7 on 7 in shells in the spring. Much harder for John Williams or for Colin Oliver to show much in these sorts of situations. Corners, receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends, linebackers, there is an enormous amount of value in these practices. There's a reason minicamp is mandatory. And there's a reason the rookies show up early for training camp. They need these reps. And I feel like I have to have this conversation every year because there's a group of Packer players who are hurt, young Packer players with opportunities. Guys, we were excited to see. Now they're not going to have that same opportunity. And yes, they can show up to training camp and maybe it's fine. And the paths change everything. So missing training camp is probably like missing 2 or 3 days of mini camp. For every day of training camp you miss, especially once the pads come on, it's like 2 or 3 days of mini camp and OTAs. So it's even more important that guys like King and Williams and Oliver and Robinson, Micah and Darius, the Packers only care about one of them. That they're there for camp, training camp. Because every day you miss then, not only is it more valuable than the time lost, but then it becomes exponentially more difficult and builds on itself. So for each day, that compounds. It's not just like 1 + 1 + 1. No, 3 days suddenly becomes like 5 days, because then you got to catch up. And it's just so different. You're swimming. You're not going to be able to catch up the same way. The pads change everything. And we got to wait. But I want to talk about the pads and how much they change and why next on Locked On Packers. Thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Scouting. As training camps gets closer and moves are made, host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan you can be this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. Donovan Jennings got some run at center in minicamp. And that stood out to me as one of the more interesting positional storylines of the spring. And we have been looking closely at the offensive line machinations here. And I understand that sort of minutia is not for everybody. But I also trust the audience, and you guys are football sickos. And so I know that there are at least a portion of you who are going to go with me on this journey. If it's not for you, no harm, no foul. I appreciate you listening as always. But the reason the Jennings piece is interesting is he has been someone who, from the moment he came to Green Bay, has been this intriguing combination of size, experience, and athleticism. Kind of the prototype of the sorts of projects that the Packers have made work in the past. But they've invested so much along the offensive line that it became difficult to understand where he fit in. They paid Aaron Banks. They drafted Jordan Morgan and Anthony Belton. It seems like one of those guys is probably going to be your right guard starter at some point. Now, the Belton piece of this is interesting, and he's been working primarily as a left tackle. I believe done some work at right tackle based on the reporting, but has not cross-trained at guard yet, which is interesting because at this time last year, Jordan Morgan had played basically everywhere on the offensive line. Even by this time, played multiple positions in rookie camp. Now, maybe that's just they thought Jordan Morgan as a first-round pick was more capable than Anthony Belton as a second-round pick. Maybe they think Belton is a tackle only. You know, Ross Uglin was on the show talking about how he thinks Anthony Belton is a no-doubt guard for the Packers, but that doesn't seem like that's the case, at least as it stands right now. His future is something that I'm certainly got my eye on. But I think most likely is Rasheed Walker wins the left tackle job this year. Jordan Morgan becomes your right guard of the future. Anthony Belton, you get a chance to play him at left tackle. Maybe you switch. Zach Tom plays left tackle. Anthony Belton plays right tackle. We'll see. But then Elton Jenkins, if he doesn't get an extension, you have a question at center. Maybe you can get Sean Ryan on a cheap deal. I think the Packers in a year move on from Elton Jenkins if he doesn't get a new deal. I've said on the record, I believe that they would be wise to extend Elton Jenkins. He's exactly the kind of player they have in the past extended on third contracts, even if third contracts have been rare for them. But even if they do that, they don't have a backup center, and they still have some thinness on that interior offensive line. Having a real backup center would be pretty valuable. The fact that Jennings could play guard, really valuable. This is something that I'm going to be keeping my eye on for when training camp comes, because everything changes when you put the pads on. I don't know that we can learn almost anything about offensive and defensive linemen before pads get put on. And I'm sure there are things, you know, the minutia, the nuance of hand placement and some of that stuff, you can at least get a feel for in shells, footwork, foot quickness, those kinds of things. But you also, if you watch tape of Anthony Belton, you know what he's capable of from a dancing bear standpoint. But until the pads come on, you don't get to see the true brute force that he possesses. It's just not possible. So how much changes? Now, this would be one of the reasons why before you deal with the pads, you might want to cross-train him, get him thinking about, okay, if I'm at a guard, what am I doing here? Because once the pads come on, if he's not having to think about what he's doing, or even if he is a little, he can let his physical tools take over, and that can close whatever thought slowness. If you're thinking you're slower, it can close that delta in terms of effectiveness. Okay, you're a half step slower to think about something, but because you're Anthony Belton and you're so powerful, you're in good shape. I would think that would lead, at least in mini camps, to more explorations, more experimentation. So when we get to training camp, this is the real stuff. This is when we find out what they really think of these players. How much are you really going to put on their plate? And I do think the fact that Jordan Morgan had worked 4 offensive linemen spots by the time training camp opened, and that Anthony Belton hasn't, despite the fact that there is a potential long-term opportunity at right guard for him, tells you, number one, the difference in quality of player that they see between Jordan Morgan and Anthony Belton. And number two, that I think some of this stuff just doesn't matter early on. When a player like Belton, you want to get him locked in. We had the rookie orientation series. Kenton Gibbs came on here and told us confidence is the key thing. So you don't want to overwhelm him, overload him. And when he starts to play, get the pads on, you feel comfortable at left tackle, bang, let's hit the ground running and maul some dudes. But that's why John Williams has got to get healthy. And it's why I like this Donovan Jennings experiment. Like, get him ready to go. Get him comfortable snapping the ball to Jordan Love, so that when the pads come on, this can be a seamless transition. And then let's see how this really happens. The permutations that first week of camp are going to tell us a lot. Where does Jordan Morgan play? Where does he play first? Who fills in if training camp opens and Elton Jenkins is still nowhere to be found, at least on the field? He'll be holding in because of the new rules. You got mandatory fines if they hold out. So he'd show up and then not be on the field. Okay, is it Jacob Monk? Is it Sean Ryan? Is it Donovan Jennings? Let's see. The first opportunity with the pads is going to tell us a ton about where they look at this offensive line. And it's another reason why, Colin Oliver, you got to be healthy, buddy. John Williams, you got to be healthy. The pad part, less important for the corners, Micah Robinson and Kalen King. But certainly when 11 on 11 is happening, you want to be out there. The pads change everything. It changes everything. All right, back tomorrow as we move through the offseason. This is the slow part of the offseason. So we're working on guests. We're going to do some rookie orientations this week, just to keep things interesting, to keep things lively as we move through the next month. We're going to take a little time off next week. We're going to have only 3 episodes next week. I will be traveling. So, we have some opportunities here to let you guys not have to do homework while it's beautiful weather. Go out, mow the lawn, go out, play some golf, go out and swim, go on a boat, go fishing, go have fun. And we appreciate you listening to Locked On Packers wherever you're doing that. And you can fish and listen to Locked On Packers for sure. You can definitely mow the lawn. Love a podcast lawn mow situation. So follow me on all the social medias. Follow the podcast on the social medias as well. Subscribe wherever you get podcasts. Subscribe over on our YouTube page. You can watch us. You can listen to us there. So you can stay Locked On Packers.